Cool, very nice. So, thank you everyone for being here and all the Etherlink crew for pulling this together. So I'm Luis, I'm co-founder of Aragon and also CEO of Aragon One, which is one of the teams working on the Aragon project. But I'm not here today to talk about Aragon itself. There's some content about our developer tools and what's Aragon during these couple of days. But I'm here to talk about true decentralization and what it means to create a true decentralized entity and the risks that we face right now if we don't adhere to this radical decentralization. So we are at this stage in which it is very clear that crypto could become the next establishment. So we have a set of trends. We have, crypto is very hard to use for people. It's very abstract. Like, it's not like in the 90s when like internet, was created. Well, it was created before, but like when it became more mainstream, people started to use it. That was, it kind of changed technology. But now we are changing technology and societal aspects. We're changing how people organize. We're changing how people, live in their day-to-day basis. And this is very abstract for people to tell them, politics is broken. We will use this DAO that people can use to get together and act and share resources and all of that. That's very hard to tell people. Or, for example, your identity is not the identity that the government gives you. That is a stuff that it doesn't have to be that way, but it's been that way for a lot of years. And so people are just like, we break the mental frameworks. And then it's very abundant capital-wise, which is kind of a problem also because the incentives are kind of fucked up right now. You do an ICO, you raise $100 million. What do? Well, you kind of release something half-baked, and then you become a VC or whatever, and that's it. And that's not how it should work, right? With founders of projects that are so ambitious and are so visionary. So we have all the right ingredients for crypto to be the next establishment, to create a lot of different classes, like the crypto Illuminati or the crypto elite, who know how to use all these tools, who know how to sort of engage with people, so they seem like visionaries and amazing technologists, and then they raise $4 billion, and they use the money to bribe universities or whatever, if you know what I'm talking about, and that just creates a new elite, right? That doesn't help create the world that we are all trying to create here, which is more fair, which is more free. So, what can we do here? We have two different kind of decisions to take. One is ideological, and I will go over what ideological decisions we can take to avoid this, and also other ones are technical. If we think about how we use computers these days, a lot of technical decisions were made for us decades ago with Microsoft and Apple and other companies. And they were technical decisions, but these technical decisions have very deep implications. So we have to be very conscious about that. So I will get us started with the first chapter, which is ideological decisions. So what are the decisions that we have to take from an ideology point of view so crypto actually becomes what we want it to become? So first one is radical transparency. Today we have projects raising large amounts of money, and then the money, we don't really know if people are going to use it to buy Lambos or to go live in an island for the rest of their lives. You can kind of know by looking at their GitHub. If their GitHub is outdated for 3 months, maybe guess bad and you will be correct. If they are working a lot, you kind of know that they are doing right stuff. But anyway, this shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't have to look for these signals. This should be the teams that are actually transparent, and they push the limits for transparency, because at the end, they have a duty with their community. And so I want to share some stuff that we're trying to do in that direction. So for example, transparency of funds and how we spend funds. So if you go to transparency.aragon.org, you will see how we spend each cent that we raise in the token sale. So for example, here, Alexa, who is our ops person, has done an amazing job documenting every single expense there. So you can see, for example, for our grants program, what is the money that we're giving to each of the grantees? You can click there. It takes you to the transaction on the Ethereum blockchain that shows, how much it was worth in fiat at the time we made a payment, and how much is it worth now, how much Ether was it, or any ERC20 token. You can see even for meetups, a New York meetup we did, or like a hackathon venue we paid for, you can go there and see how we spend money. And even for payroll and stuff like that, you can go and see how we like spend on paying all people during a month or stuff like that. So I think that's very important because at the end we have this duty with our community that we cannot forget about. Then also, it's not only about fans, but like, what are you building? Are you working on something? Are you just like, buying Lambos and going off islands all day? And the answer to that, I believe, is also transparency of work. So we have this channel in our Rocket chat, which is like the public chat we use for Aragon. It's aragon.chat. And it's called Check-in. And every week, if you are a community member, or you are a core developer, or a core contributor, you can go there and list 3 to 5 items you have worked on during that week for the project. So stuff that you have contributed. And again, it's not just for like core team members of any Aragon team. It's for any contributor, really. So you may go there, and if you do a pull request, you may go there and put it there so the community knows that you have contributed. And it is super cool because each week, like we do this each week, and you can see what's going on each week in a very simple way. You don't have to guess, right? We just tell you. Then the next one, I think, is decentralized token supply. I am not happy with how token sales are turning this year, and for the later part of last year as well. Like early on, there was this, in Bitcoin back in the day, because I went into Bitcoin before going into Ethereum, and this was this concept of pre-mine, and people were very averse to pre-mines. So pre-mine meant that if you release a coin or a token, and you retain some for years, people were really criticizing you because they said, is that fair? Look at Satoshi, for example. Obviously, that's kind of an extreme, right? Satoshi is kind of an extreme. And also, Satoshi kept a lot of coins for himself, right? Not for any legal entity, but for himself. And there is a lot of power into foundations or legal entities retaining some part of the tokens so they can work and pay salaries and, hire people. But what is not okay is like, if you are trying to create a decentralized project, and you own more than 50% of the tokens, is it really decentralized? And I'm seeing a lot of that today with a lot of how token sales have done these days, that you sell 3% of the tokens or whatever. And I mean, depends on the token, but for tokens that you that they are purely cryptographic assets that in the future will be able to be used by the community for governance, for example, that's a bad start because people should have more governance power than just whatever small percentage. Then another core critical error that we are doing these days is not having multiple teams. So, for example, if you look at Ethereum, Ethereum has the Ethereum Foundation, which is a centralized team, it's the money, is the project that raised the money, is the legal entity that raised the money back in the day, and is legally responsible for the project. But then something interesting happened, and it was parity. So at some point, the parity team forked off the Ethereum Foundation. And right now, that's awesome because we have this healthy, competition between the two teams implementing different stuff. And I believe that's key because at the end, if we are working on, creating decentralized projects, what is the point if just one single team has all the development power, right? The same way that just one legal entity having the majority of the tokens. If you have one entity that is just hiring and employing every single developer working on the protocol, and sometime they decide to change paths, or they decide to fire people, or they disappear, for example, then it's gone. You don't have that project anymore. So it's open source. That helps, of course. But if we want to go the decentralized route, we need to have multiple teams. And this is the case, for example, of Bitcoin as well, right? Bitcoin has different companies. Obviously, some of them are more important than others, development-wise. We may have the case of Blockstream, for example. But overall, we have multiple teams working on it. And there is something we've been trying to replicate. We still have the Aragon Foundation there, but we are trying to basically fire everyone from the Aragon Foundation and move them into separate teams. And the cool thing about this is you may have teams that are opinionated. So here we have two teams. One is Aragon 1, which is the one that Jorge and me are leading. And then you have the Aragon DSU, which is a completely different one, led by the guys at Giveth that some of you may know. And the cool thing is we are so different. Aragon 1 is a super small team, super high bandwidth, and super close as well. And then you have the Aragon DAC, which is more like a fluid entity. Like any contributor may go there and collaborate and be part of the team very easily, get a basic income for contributing to Aragon. And this is super cool because we have different paths to arrive to the same goal. We are all going around, let's make Aragon great. But then we have different ways of arriving there and different organization methods. And that's fantastic. That's beautiful. And then even if Aragon 1 shuts down or the DSA shuts down, the project is able to continue. And I think that's very important for decentralizing projects. Then what this allows is very interesting. After having this, you may basically wind down your central legal entity or your foundation or the company that did the token sale or something like that. You can do that because development, which is what it's important, it's been done in independent teams that you are funding from this entity. So you have, what we're trying to do now is we're trying to have the foundation like a minimum viable foundation that just employs very few people and just focuses on giving grants to teams. So to these teams here, for example, but in the future more teams that apply, or in general the contributors that want to be part of the Aragon ecosystem. And the foundation will eventually basically spend all its funds on different teams and funding teams and infrastructure until it runs out of funds. And that includes basically giving the money away to the Aragon network, which is the DAO that is going to represent the legal entity. But before, making sure that a DAO or a decentralized organization can be the one carrying the torch, you have to make sure that the foundation, for example, doesn't employ people. So it's kind of abstract in a way, who drives the project until you're able to fully decentralize it, which is the foundation, from the actual development teams that are working on the implementation. And then technical decisions, which is a very interesting part. So, as I was talking about, our plan is to give back or give away all the funds the foundation raised to a DAO. That will be the Aragon network. That will be the DAO basically carrying the torch after the foundation winds down. And so the idea here is, so we raised about $25 million at the time, which was worth around $400 million in January. Now it's 80 because, crypto life. But the idea is that after spending money into funding these teams I was talking about and other contributors, we eventually are able to transition the funds to a DAO, to have the community govern them. So the idea is you can just start it out and start experimenting. And the cool thing is you can put, $100K, see how it goes. You can put $1 million, see how it goes. You can put 10. And then it's obviously a risk, right? Because in our case, we are heavily betting on decentralized governance because that's what Aragon is doing, basically. But still, you can do things like, for example, retain veto power for a period of time. So something that we're trying to do right now is we're trying to see how we can slowly move from this centralized model of a foundation to totally decentralized one. So for example, the first step we want to do is we want to have the foundation making proposals to the token holders and being like, hey, I want to spend $1 million this year on grants to Ethereum projects. And then token holders can veto that decision, can say, hey, I don't like it, please don't do that. Or they can approve it, which basically means not doing veto, not exercising their veto power. And that does not give full control to token holders of the project yet, but it's a first step. And you can educate them, and you can see how they do governance in a decentralized manner until you're able to start decentralizing more and more until the foundation doesn't do really anything, just token holders controlling the funds directly on the blockchain. Also, governed upgradability. Upgradability has been a very hot topic ever since the DAO hack. It's very obvious that upgradability is very good for smart contracts because otherwise you stick with the bug forever and or you cannot add new features to a smart contract or stuff like that. And not only for the smart contracts, for the front end as well. If you go to the Aragon app, for example, it is upgraded, its front end is upgraded via a decentralized package manager we created. So in the future, the community may be able to actually approve those updates. So if you're familiar with NPM and everything that happened in NPM with malicious software and stuff like that, you know that centralized package managers are a huge security fail. Or the Chrome Web Store. The Chrome Web Store removed MetaMask for some time. And they can only not do that, but they can replace it with a malicious code base, for example, and steal all your funds. So we shouldn't be trusting Google, Apple, and all the others with this. So if we introduce upgradability in the blockchain, it is very important that the community has something to do with it, and it's not just like a single address that can upgrade the contracts, because how is that different from the world that we live in which like Apple or Microsoft or whatever can upgrade the app without telling their users or requesting their approval? So if you implement upgradability in smart contracts, please think about governance a little bit, because otherwise we are going to create decentralized systems, but then in practice, if users go down the rabbit hole, they will find out that you can replace the code. And if you can replace the code, it's not decentralized. So please don't do that. And then this is my favorite part. You know that GitHub was bought by Microsoft, right? And that was pretty bad. So now there's this amazing tool called Pando. And Pando is decentralized Git on Ethereum. So what you see here is a repo being created. So you install Pando, you do Pando in it, it connects to your IPFS node, Ethereum node, all of that good stuff. And then you can add origins. Those origins there live on the Ethereum blockchain. And the super cool thing here is you can give fine-grained access to different contributors and different addresses. And there's no single point of failure. Because, for example, if GitHub goes rogue, imagine what they could do. I mean, they would be pretty bad. Like, they could basically take down the whole crypto movement in no time, but just updating things on their servers, which is pretty bad. With Pando, that cannot happen. And the cool thing about this also is once you have decentralized Git, you can put governance on top of it. So you can have the community govern how you push updates to your software. You can have the community govern how you add features to your software. You can have the community basically do everything. And also, this is super important for open source sustainability. If you're familiar with Ethereum and how the development is going, you will see that even with Ethereum having all of this value, billions of dollars, the development activity is not super great compared to what it could be. So we're kind of falling into a tragedy of the commons there, which is funny because the blockchain was supposed to remove the tragedy of the commons. So that's where open source sustainability comes in mind. Once you have a decentralized Git on the blockchain, you can start incentivizing people. So you can start having a basic income for the maintainers. And for example, you buy tokens of this decentralized or of this open source project. And then for those tokens, you get governance power over which features to add or stuff like that. And then you can sell them if you believe the open source project doesn't have any value. But you can also buy tokens to fund the project, and in exchange you get governance power, and you get to pick maintainers or stuff like that. And if you merge a pull request, you get back a reward, stuff like that, which is very powerful. But also this is very exciting because it lets you give full control to the community and to the users. Because right now, as I said before, crypto projects in the end are kind of centralized, without a D. Because developers have a lot of power, right? So you're a developer, you have push access to a repo, you can commit stuff, so you can basically change the software however you want. Using something like this, you may still have your branch and push whatever you want to that branch, but then you may have some way of basically making sure the community can veto your changes or can actually vote for what branch to pick as master, for example. So it is super interesting. If you look for Pando Nest, for example, which is the name of our grants program, you will find a lot of info about it, and you can run it. It works today. It's built on Aragon. And so to finalize this, I want to talk about something we are working on because obviously I said a lot of don't do's and some do's also as well, some tips to decentralized projects. But we are still not there ourselves. We are trying to make sure we can decentralize our legal entity, we can decentralize our repos, we can decentralize everything. And John from our team worked on this very cool draft, and I'm just going to share one part of it, which is the AGP. And AGP stands for Aragon Governance Proposal, very similar to, for example, EIPs, but in this case it's broader. It's not just for improvements, proposals to the protocol. This is more in general to the Aragon project itself. And I thought it was very interesting because here John basically put six different points or 6 different tracks of what an AGP may look like. So you have budget, so transferring funds from the budget account, let's say the hot wallet of the project. For example, so we make a grant to this project or stuff like that. Then you have foundation. So there is stuff that is very hard to decentralize. For example, trademarks, right? Can a DAO own a trademark? Well, not yet. There has to be a legal entity owning it. So here, the thought process is token holders can vote for making changes to the foundation. For example, shall the foundation update the privacy policy for its website? Shall the foundation change how the trademark is used, or who should be allowed to use the Aragon trademark? Then you have Meta, which is chanting this same document. Then you have proclamations, and this gets very interesting, right? People were asking us, for example, what is Aragon's stance on EIP, whatever? And we were like, let's poll our token holders. And we did that. We told our token holders, what do you think about this EIP? And they voted. And I think this is just that. This is a very interesting way of letting your community decide what are the proclamations of the whole Aragon network, of the whole project. What does the project think about relevant issues? Then you have repo. So like, it would be really cool if all the Aragon code base is actually using Pando, and like the community has to approve changes, and then after doing that, we use something like our own package manager to deliver those packages. So everything happens on-chain from the moment you commit something to the moment you are using it. So there is no central point of failure from the developer to the user. No one single point of failure. And then finally, treasury, which is basically, should we buy $10 million of Bitcoin for hedging purposes or stuff like that, on how to use the treasury and the funds. We have built a lot of these tools for ourselves, like the package manager, or totally decentralized package manager, Aragon OS, which enables you to create these very complex governance schemes, and also Aragon.js and stuff like that, which lets you create beautiful frontends for it without having to care a lot. And we believe that our tools enable true decentralization because that's what we want for ourselves. So we have built this for ourselves, and then, of course, for the whole community to use if they like it. And finally, we have some enterprises for the hackathon, but there will be a workshop about this, like how to build Aragon apps and stuff like that. But we are just like, the whole dev team is here. So if you need any help hacking or whatever, just find us. We are wearing Aragon merch all day. As I see, I'm wearing like socks and shorts and like t-shirt. And we also have some merch to give away. That is the link to the slides, and that is the link to a developer portal where you can find more info about how to enable true decentralization with Aragon. So enjoy, and thank you.